Hello Brodude, this is Brody aka Brodude, and welcome back to another episode of Brodude Official, and today we're going to do a video I've been waiting for a while to do now. I've been working on it for quite a while, so I hope you enjoy it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to every episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Book 1, Reviewed. Before we get into this video though, we must first talk about my rating scale, as it's a bit different than some others. So I thought I'd explain it a bit. I'll be using a 1 to 10 scale, and I'll use 0.5s as well. So possible scores could be 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, etc. A 5 is a completely middling episode. If I give an episode a 5, I have equal thoughts, good and bad. And as you depart from that, 4 and 6, 3 and 7, etc., I like and dislike it more and more. So basically, that's all to say, a 6 or a 7 aren't bad ratings. They're good episodes. There are a lot of 7s especially, and I very much enjoy all of those episodes. I just wanted to clear that up so you can understand my ratings of episodes. Introductions out of the way, I present to you every episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Book 1, Reviewed. Starting with Chapter 1, The Boy in the Iceberg. Sokka and Katara discover Aang and Appa frozen in an iceberg. The siblings take them to their village, the Southern Water Tribe. Meanwhile, Aang's unfreezing attracts the attention of the banished prince of the Fire Nation, Zuko, who is looking to capture him to restore his honor. Ah, yes, the start of it all. Well, was this a good introduction to the show? Absolutely. The highlight of this episode is how well the characters are introduced. Even in the first few lines of each character, you can already understand their personalities. You can immediately tell Sokka and Katara's dynamic, and the same goes with Zuko and Iroh. You could forget the main character himself, Aang. "Do you want to go penguin sledding with me?" is a great introduction line, and is pretty funny. Speaking of great introductions, the extended intro for this episode is great and explains the show's premise perfectly. Getting back to the characters, the scene with Iroh and Zuko shows Zuko's impatience as well as Iroh's wisdom, with Zuko wanting to learn more advanced firebending, but Iroh saying he's not ready. Overall, this is a very good introduction episode. There is much better to come, but this is a great way to set things up and to get a bit of a taste of what the show will be like. My only slight gripe is that the episode could have done with 1 or 2 action scenes, as it is a big part of the show. That's a minor complaint though, and it's an all-around solid way of introducing us to the show. It's a solid 7 out of 10. Chapter 2, The Avatar Returns. Prince Zuko attacks the Southern Water Tribe in seek of the Avatar. Sokka and Katara realize Aang is the Avatar and agree to accompany him on his travels. This episode effectively acts as a second introduction episode, especially considering it aired on the same day as the first. And it's possibly even better than the first one for introductions. It fixes my problem with the first episode, as it has some very fun action scenes. I like that Aang was fighting Zuko, but he decided to stop only when he saw everyone getting burned by the fire. It's a subtle moment that shows Aang's compassion. Aang's escape is definitely my highlight of this episode. It's super fun, and his fight with Zuko is cool, and it shows off their fighting style as well. Aang goes into the Avatar state for the first time, and although much more destruction comes from the Avatar state later, this still shows off how powerful it can be, as it helps him escape. This is another solid episode, on par with the first, 7 out of 10. Chapter 3, The Southern Air Temple. Team Avatar explore Aang's former home, where Aang learns of the Fire Nation's genocide on his people. Meanwhile, Zuko and Commander Zhao compete in an Agni Kai. This episode is boosted up majorly by 2 parts. It's already good, mind you, but Aang going into the Avatar state and Zuko and Zhao's Agni Kai are absolutely outstanding. First, let's talk about Aang. Throughout the whole episode, he's having a fun time, and he thinks that obviously the Fire Nation couldn't get to the Southern Air Temple without a flying bison. Even when he gets there and everyone is gone, he thinks they've just escaped. Katara tries to hide it from him, but the truth comes to light when Aang finds the corpse of Gyatso, his old friend. He then goes into the Avatar state, and is only stopped with the help of Katara, in a great emotional scene. With Katara's compassion, he's out of the Avatar state, and Katara and Sokka soften the blow by telling them that they'll be his family now. Now, let's talk about Zuko. His Agni Kai was great, with some beautiful animation, but its implications were greater. Seeing Zuko actually winning, taking Iroh's advice was great, and he surprisingly held back from tainting his victory. Plus, Zuko fighting somebody that we like even less than him makes us root for him and plants the seeds for Zuko being a sympathetic character even this early on. It was tough to choose between these two for a highlight, but I had to go with Zuko and Zhao's Agni Kai. On a side note, Zhao's a really underrated character and plays his role perfectly. Also of note in this episode is the introduction of Momo, and a pretty fun scene that helps keep it light in this darker episode. The other two first episodes set up the show well, but this episode set the foundation for how good an Avatar episode could be. An all-around excellent episode. I rate it an 8.5 out of 10. Chapter 4, The Warriors of Kyoshi. Team Avatar traveled to Kyoshi Island. Aang lets the fame of being the Avatar get to his head. Meanwhile, Sokka gets trained by the Kyoshi warriors. Zuko finds out that Aang is on Kyoshi Island and attacks the village. This is another solid episode. Before we get to the positives, though, I would like to discuss a gripe I have with the episode. What happens at the beginning with Aang and Katara is kind of dumb. It was pretty predictable as well, and Aang letting the fame get to his head is somewhat out of character. Once you get past that part of the episode, though, this is a really fun time. Suki is a great character, and her scenes with Sokka are the highlight of the episode. The kiss scene in particular. "I am a warrior, but I'm a girl too" is a very powerful line. The episode also picks up when Zuko comes into the mix. It makes Aang's cockiness have consequences. As if he had just left the village, it wouldn't have been destroyed. It was interesting seeing Team Avatar decide if they should evacuate the village or stay and fight, as there isn't a clear answer. Aang taking control of the sea monster from earlier was pretty cool and was a nice touch to finish off the episode. Also of note is the many memes that came from this episode. Foam Mouth Guy, the clip of Aang running over the water, and Aang's air ring. Memes aside, despite the slow start to this episode, it picked up greatly and became a very fun watch. 8 out of 10. Chapter 5, The King of Omashu. While in Omashu, the king challenges Aang to 3 tasks in order to save his friends. The king later reveals himself to be Aang's old friend, Bumi. Since so much of this episode is the interaction between Bumi and Aang, this episode's quality relies on how good of a character Bumi is. And I'm happy to say Bumi is a really fun character, and is the highlight of this episode. He makes this episode one of the funnier ones. Because of this, the episode is a bit less concerned with advancing the overall plot, but it makes up for it by being a pretty fun episode. The 3 challenges Bumi gives Aang all have interesting solutions. They all make Aang think outside the box, but none of the answers feel contrived. And the reveal of the king being Bumi was quite good, if a bit predictable. This episode could be described as filler. I don't have a problem with filler, as long as it's either enjoyable on its own merits or develops the characters. While this episode doesn't really do the latter, it absolutely is a good time on its own. Overall, it's probably the worst so far, but it's not by any means bad. It's still a solid 7 out of 10. Chapter 6, Imprisoned. Team Avatar stay at an Earth Kingdom town that is ruled by the Fire Nation. Katara accidentally gets Haru, an Earthbender, arrested. She gets herself arrested to save him. This episode is great for showing the Fire Nation's effect on everyone. Seeing them harass this town is really depressing. This episode really goes to show how this town has lost complete hope, and we'll get back to that later. Anyway, let's talk about Haru. Haru is a pretty meh character. However, what goes on around him is what makes this episode interesting. Seeing Katara's attachment to him is what makes it devastating when we learn that he's been arrested. Once he does get taken away, Katara successfully gets taken away as well, in a pretty fun scene. To contrast this, the next part of the episode is really depressing. It all goes back to them having lost hope. Katara asks their plan to escape, but they have none. There's no earth to bend. Luckily, she saves the day and gives them a speech to get them riled up, and they don't do anything. However, Katara comes up with a new plan. She gets coal and tells them to go after them. Now that they have earth to bend, they still don't do anything. It just shows how broken their spirits are. That even after Katara's attempts to help them, they still can't do anything. It takes Haru and his father to finally attack for anyone else to do anything. All of the scenes on the boat have to be the highlight. They're great. Also of note is the end of the episode where Zuko ends up with Katara's necklace in a nice cliffhanger. That is an all-around solid episode, and the boat scenes boost it quite a bit, giving it a 7.5 out of 10. Chapter 7, Winter Solstice, Part 1, The Spirit World. Aang attempts to save an Earth Kingdom village that is being attacked by a Spirit World monster. Of note, the highlight of this episode is Iroh's escape, assisted by Zuko. And before that, it was nice seeing Zuko actually caring that his uncle had gone missing, and had gone searching for him. As well as the rest of their scenes, these are really the only parts of the episode that really hooked me. I found the rest of the episode rather boring, and I don't have much to know on it. This village is just not interesting to me, and the spirit monster isn't really either. We do get the introduction of the spirit world, however, and I will say this episode's not downright bad, and the fact that there is some essential setup here boosts it to a 6 out of 10. Chapter 8, Winter Solstice Part 2, Avatar Roku. Aang travels to the Fire Temple to receive a message from Avatar Roku. Zuko and Zhao follow, but they soon regret it. This episode just builds and builds and builds to an absolutely epic climax. The rest of the episode is good as well, though. The scene of the Fire Nation blockade is nail-biting, with Team Avatar just barely making it out. Once we get in, the gang doesn't get a break, though, as Zuko and Zhao soon follow. Zhao is about to open the gate that Aang is talking to Roku in, and then comes quite possibly the best scene in the show so far. The gate opens, but awaiting Zhao isn't Aang, it's Avatar Roku, and this man goes ham. Like, holy crap, the destruction is incredible. This scene is extremely cathartic. It's obviously the highlight. The episode was good, but this boosts it up to the best episode so far. An excellent scene that helps make an excellent episode. 8.5 out of 10. Chapter 9. The Waterbending Scroll. Katara steals the Waterbending Scroll from some pirates. Zuko and Iroh team up with these pirates to capture Aang. Quite honestly, there isn't much to note on this episode. With that being said, this episode is just fun. There's nothing super important in this episode, but it's relatively enjoyable. My highlight is the mini-feud between Zuko and Iroh and the pirates near the end. Both Iroh and Zuko have a few surprisingly funny lines in this episode. So while there's not much to say about this episode, it is enjoyable, and I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Chapter 10. Jet. Team Avatar meet the Freedom Fighters, led by Jet. However, Jet is not what he seems. For some reason, people seem to dislike this episode. I disagree, as I believe the Freedom Fighters are really interesting and fun characters. Jet especially is very interesting, who is my highlight of the episode. His tale is tragic, as he had something taken away from him from the Fire Nation, but that has blinded his morals and he cares more about taking them out than killing an entire village. It's no longer about justice for him, it's about revenge. This is also shown in the scene with the old man from the Fire Nation. He's completely harmless, but just because he's Fire Nation, Jet takes him down. There's also a good episode for Sokka. It shows the difference that makes someone like him good and someone like Jet bad. Even with Jet telling the rest of Team Avatar he saved him, he sticks to his morals, and it's because of him that the village didn't die in the hands of Jet. While all of this is good, there are some negatives to the episode. Firstly, while I like Jet, I'm not really a fan of his relationship with Katara. As well as that, it gets a bit annoying seeing Aang and Katara believe Jet over Sokka. Even with that, this is still a very enjoyable episode, and I give it an 8 out of 10. Chapter 11. The Great Divide. Aang must resolve the conflict between two tribes that have been going on for 100 years. Oh boy, this episode. This episode is widely considered to be the worst of the show, and I kind of agree. Many have recently defended this episode, saying that people only dislike it because it was overplayed. But as someone who first watched a show on Netflix, that just isn't true. First, though, let's get into the positives of the episode. Firstly, Aang solving Katara and Sokka's dispute at the beginning of the episode is nice foreshadowing. Additionally, I like that Aang can't just easily resolve the conflict. This is where the problems come in, though, because Aang doesn't know how to resolve this conflict, he just lies. He literally just lies, and that's what we take away from the episode. This really isn't in line with Aang's character. Additionally, a large portion of this episode is just two groups of people bickering. So yeah, this episode isn't great. With that being said, despite my problems with it, it's hard to call this episode bad. Even the worst elements aren't that bad, and no matter what happens, unless they're extremely out of character, which doesn't really happen, it's always at least somewhat enjoyable watching Aang, Katara, and Sokka do just about anything in the show, which really speaks to the strength of their character. With that being said, it may seem that the bad outweighs the good here, but for me it just barely edges on the good side. I'll give it a 5.5 out of 10. It's nowhere near great, and it's likely the worst of the show, but I can't bring myself to consider it bad. I'm quite neutral on it, but it edges on having more good elements than bad. Chapter 12. The Storm. Aang tells Katara why he ran away from the Air Temple, while Iroh tells the crew how Zuko was banished from the Fire Nation. We move from one of the most disliked episodes to one of the most loved, at least from Book 1. And I pretty much completely agree. I know, Brody'd out here with the hot takes. But seriously, this episode is absolutely incredible, and absolutely tragic. Both Zuko and Aang's stories explain a lot, and gives a lot of context to how they came to be. It also shows how Zuko and Aang are really just two sides of the same coin. I love the similarities of their stories. It also reveals how Zuko got his scar exactly, as well as how he got banished. This makes Zuko even more of a sympathetic character, as we see that he wasn't born evil. He was made this way by his father. The reason he has a scar is because he spoke out in a war meeting in an act of kindness. Aang's tale is also brilliant. It's tragic seeing them slowly taking everyone he loved taken away from him, due to his duty to the world as Avatar. This all caps off with the monkey Atso getting taken away from him, the only person he had left, which led to him running off and being trapped for 100 years. Also, Zuko deciding to bring the ship to safety instead of going after Aang is great character development, and him and Aang stare at each other is very symbolic. There really isn't much to say that hasn't already been said. My highlight will go to Zuko's backstory, though his and Aang's are both great. This is a beloved episode for good reason. It's great, well deserving of its praise. It's the best so far, and I give it a 9.5 out of 10. Chapter 13, The Blue Spirit. Aang must find a cure for Sokka and Katara's illness, but on the way he gets captured. A mysterious masked man called the Blue Spirit saves them. This episode is just super interesting. The Blue Spirit concept itself is interesting, and the fact that Zuko has to save Aang was super interesting. It's so cool to see Zuko and Aang fight together, and Zuko being forced to save the Avatar so he can eventually steal him is just such a cool concept. The dynamics of this episode are super complex, and that's what makes this episode great. My highlight of the episode, though, is when Zuko wakes up. Aang is talking to him. He asks him if he thinks that if they met 100 years ago, if they could have been friends. Zuko tries to strike him, but he was expecting it already and immediately runs away. It's kind of tragic, really, as Aang sees in Zuko his kindness, but he sadly knows that he can't bring it out of him. This episode is very solid. It's the first we see of Zuko and Aang fighting side by side, which is something that will be explored later. It's a solid 8 out of 10. Chapter 14, The Fortune Teller. Team Avatar travel to a village with a fortune teller. The first part of this episode is pretty dull. A lot of it is focused on the relationship between Aang and Katara, which is one of the weaker aspects of the show, in my opinion. However, the next part of the episode is pretty good. I'm not really into the new characters here, other than Mang, who has a really touching moment with Aang near the end of the episode, which is my highlight. She just seemed like a weirdo before, but we see that she's just a self-conscious girl with a crush. But Aang, of course, doesn't feel the same way. This episode also makes up for the weaker beginning with some decent comedy, with the people of the town being good foils for Sokka, who is very logical and scientific. Not the best episode, but it's a fun one, with a few good moments. 7 out of 10. Chapter 15, Bato of the Water Tribe. The gang meets Bato, a Water Tribe warrior who tries to help them reunite with their father. Meanwhile, Zuko, with the help of June, tracks down Aang. This episode is way overhated. To be clear, I dislike the bad parts as much as everyone else, but I think people forget the good parts of the episode. First, let's talk about the bad. Yes, Aang was very selfish and out of character here. There was no reason for him to hide the letter from Sokka and Katara's father. Ultimately, though, that's just not the whole episode, and the rest of it's actually pretty good. Firstly, June is a pretty cool character. Her, Zuko, and Iroh bounce off each other quite well, with Zuko being very hot-headed, and June being very teasy. Additionally, the ending fight was great. We see more of Aang's fighting style of evading, and Appa coming to the fight was freaking awesome. It was sick as heck, and a great way to end the episode. It's gotta be the highlight. So yeah, while this episode has one pretty bad element that somewhat brings it down, the rest of it's pretty great. With all this in mind, I give this episode a 7.5 out of 10. Chapter 16, The Deserter. Aang finds Zhong, and with Avatar Roku forcing him to, he teaches Aang firebending. The first part of this episode isn't very notable. It's good, but there isn't much to say on it. Speaking of good, Zhong. He's an interesting character, and I like his relationship with Aang. He doesn't want to teach him, but he reluctantly does when he's forced by Avatar Roku. He tries to teach him the proper way, but Aang is impatient. He finally lets him start using fire, and Aang pays the price. He lacks restraint, and burns Katara. He learns his lesson, though, and uses that to defeat Zhao. We learn that Zhao was a former student of Zhong, in a great twist. My favorite part of the episode is when Aang realizes that Zhao lacks restraint, and that scene of Zhao burning his own ships is my highlight. It's fitting with Aang's character, with him using his wits and evading, but he also uses what he learned in this specific episode. Also of note in this episode is Katara using her healing abilities for the first time. This is a great episode. It's well deserving of an 8 out of 10. Chapter 17, The Northern Air Temple. Team Avatar discover that there are airbenders at the Northern Air Temple, but when they go there, they aren't truly airbenders, and they have made some changes to the sacred location. I really like the concept of this episode. It makes sense that Aang wouldn't understand what they were doing at first. It seems like a natural development. It's also nice that, while conflicting, either Aang or Tio are in the wrong. Aang doesn't like the changes being made to the sacred place, but Tio just wants to have fun, and his father just wants his son to have a good life. Speaking of Tio, I think he's great. His backstory makes him very likable. I also like his father, who has great chemistry with Sokka. It's nice that Aang finally accepts their technology once he sees Katara being able to fly and have a good time, and when he sees that some of the life will live on. That soon changes, though, as he sees they have been making some weapons for the Fire Nation. It's tragic, really, that the father had to do this and hide it from his son to protect him. Obviously, they won't stand for this. My highlight of the episode is the ending fight scene. It's well thought out, and it's super creative and fun, with Sokka and the Inventor bouncing off each other perfectly. It's surprising how big this fight is, considering it's not a special episode. The final scene of the Fire Nation guy saying that this loss will lead to many victories is incredible foreshadowing. This episode is excellent. I believe it deserves an 8.5 out of 10. Chapter 18. The Waterbending Master. Team Avatar finally reached the North Pole, but the Master refuses to teach Katara. Meanwhile, Sokka spends his time with the princess of the Northern Water Tribe, Yue. I really consider this a part of the Siege of the North. This sets up a lot for it, and all the episodes take place in this one location. With that being said, these final 3 episodes are absolutely incredible. This episode acts as a calm before the storm, which is perfect, as it's truly a relief that we have finally arrived at the North Pole. Don't get me wrong, though, there's still a lot going on in this episode. First, let's talk about the North Pole itself. One of the many great parts of Avatar is the beautiful locations, and this is no different. I love the look of the North Pole, as it's so distinct from all of the other locations. It feels so grand. Also of note is Yue, whose relationship with Sokka is just so cute. Sokka trying to make moves is my favorite thing ever. I've already said so much good about this episode before even getting into the main plot. Katara gets some great character development here, and her fight with the Waterbending Master is an excellent one. The twist of him being the guy that was going to marry her grandmother was also an excellent one. It also leads very smoothly into Yue getting upset and running away, and Sokka making moves. One in my opinion is the highlight of the episode. Sokka gets the kiss. It's hard not to be rooting for Sokka here. All of this, and I haven't even mentioned all of the Zuko and Iroh parts, which are great as always. There's a lot going on in this episode, and pretty much all of it is very good. This is a 9 out of 10. This is good, like really good, but it gets better. With Chapter 19, The Siege of the North Part 1. The Northern Water Tribe prepares for attack from the Fire Nation. Meanwhile, Aang travels to the Spirit World, as Zuko sneaks in to capture him. Avatar is known for its 2-part episodes, the crossroads of Destiny / the Guru, the Boiling Rock, the Day of Black Sun, etc. But this one is looked over, just for being a part of Book 1. But honestly, this doesn't feel like Book 1. And that's not a diss on Book 1, as I think it's a very overlooked just because it precedes 2 of the best seasons of any television show. But it feels like this is where Avatar got incredible. I already loved it from Book 1, but this 2-parter, as well as the Waterbending Master, is where I could tell that this show was something special. Why is it so good, though? Well, let's get right into it, as we start out with Sokka and Yue, and we all know that this relationship is great. You can't not root for Sokka here. Soon, though, we're getting into the meat of the episode, as black snow begins to fall, which means the Fire Nation is coming. They all rush for a plan, and Yue says that she can't be with Sokka, as she is engaged. They then ask for warriors, and Sokka is the first to stand. Aang then takes out a Fire Nation ship in a dauntless effort, but loses some hope as he sees the hundreds and hundreds more of Fire Nation ships ahead. Meanwhile, Sokka becomes a valuable asset, as he has information on the Fire Nation that no one else has here. He has to get along with the man that will marry Yue. We come back to an exhausted Aang, who doesn't know what to do, as he's taken out dozens of ships but has barely put a dent in the amount of them. We go to my highlight of the episode, as Zuko and Iroh have an absolutely touching scene. Iroh tells Zuko that he thinks of him as his own, and he hugs him. That scene gets me so hard. We cut back to Sokka, who can't take it and tackles Han. He gets taken off the mission. He is angry until he's told that he's been chosen to protect Yue. Zuko is slowly making his way to Aang, who is currently in the spirit world. When Zuko arrives, he and Katara have their fight. Zuko may be the better fighter, but with him at his weakest and Katara at her strongest, she's just barely able to win the fight. The wood is temporary, though, as day breaks and Zuko breaks free, takes her out, and takes Aang. The episode ends with a scene of Aang being carried by Zuko in the freezing cold. This episode is great. It isn't quite a 10, but it's as close as you can get without getting there. This is a 9.5 out of 10. The action doesn't stop, though, as we continue on with Chapter 20, The Siege of the North, Part 2. Sokka, Yue, and Katara come to save Aang. Aang returns to the spirit world. He's saved, and Zhao takes the moon spirit. Zhao and Zuko fight, and Aang goes into the Avatar state. The action immediately picks up as the Fire Nation attacks. We come to Zuko carrying Aang, who's in the spirit world. Zuko talks to Aang in a very interesting scene. He tells him that all of this struggle has made him strong. Aang talks to Ko in the spirit world. It's very creepy. I like it. Aang learns what he must do and awakens. Aang is rescued by Katara and the gang. Aang decides that he can't leave Zuko. We cut to Zhao, who has captured the moon spirit koi fish. Aang, Sokka, and Katara come in, as well as Iroh. Iroh threatens Zhao that if he kills the moon spirit, he will unleash that on him tenfold. Zhao kills it, and Iroh goes after him. Aang goes into the Avatar state in an insane scene. It's obviously the highlight. He turns into this crazy water monster thing, and absolutely nothing can stop him. Zhao and Zuko then fight. Yue realizes that her life is from the moon spirit, so she returns it to the moon. Yue and Sokka share one final kiss. We come back to Aang in this insane beast as he takes out ship after ship. Aang is released from this beast, but it isn't gone. As it takes Zhao, Zuko offers his hand, but Zhao's pride was his downfall as he refuses to take his hand. The gang look onward, hopeful. But that hope seems misplaced as we see our first look at Azula. 10 out of 10. This episode is incredible. There's so much going on. It's like nothing that has become before it. So many amazing scenes, be that obvious ones, such as Aang going into the Avatar state, or subtle ones, like Zhao, too filled with pride to accept Zuko's hand. While it's not my favorite in the entire show, it's up there. It's the best of Book 1, easily deserving of a 10. And that was every episode of Avatar The Last Airbender, Book 1, reviewed. But we're not done yet. I'm going to give my final thoughts on Book 1, as well as a ranking of each episode, from worst to best. Let's do that now. From worst to best, the rankings are: number 20, The Great Divide; number 19, Winter Solstice Part 1, The Spirit World; number 18, The Waterbending Scroll; number 17, The Fortune Teller; number 16, The King of Omashu; number 15, The Boy in the Iceberg; number 14, The Avatar Returns; number 13, Bato of the Water Tribe; number 12, Imprisoned; number 11, The Blue Spirit; number 10, The Warriors of Kyoshi; number 9, The Deserter; number 8, Jet; number 7, The Northern Air Temple; number 6, The Southern Air Temple; number 5, Winter Solstice Part 2, Avatar Roku; number 4, The Waterbending Master; number 3, The Storm; number 2, The Siege of the North Part 1; and number 1, Siege of the North Part 2. The average rating of the season is a 7.8, which on my rating scale is a very solid episode. Now let's move on to my final thoughts of Avatar Book 1. This is a great season of television. Many people underrate Book 1 because it's much more episodic, and the show gets much better. Both of these things are true, it's still absolutely incredible. Even if it does get better, you can already tell the show is something special, especially near the end of the season. And while the season is more episodic, it's almost always setting up something for later, be that setting up for later this season, later the episode, or later in the show. This episode isn't only good for setup, though, as it also stands alone as a very good season. You can see in episodes like The Waterbending Master, The Storm, The Siege of the North Part 1 and 2. You may be thinking, all these episodes came in the second half of the season, so was it really consistently good? Well, yes. The Southern Air Temple, The Warriors of Kyoshi, and The Winter Solstice Part 2 were all great episodes. Even the 2 introduction episodes, The Boy in the Iceberg and The Avatar Returns, are great episodes, and excellent introductions to the characters. Speaking of characters, that's already the thing that stands out in the show. They're already very well developed, and although there's much more for their journeys, this is an incredible start. Also known this season is some solid action, gut-punching scenes, and beautiful locations. Something that Book 1 also focuses on more is the comedy. Many people see this as a bad thing, and yeah, a lot of Avatar's most incredible scenes are a lot more serious, and it's often when the show gets really good. However, even though they lean more into the comedy, it is successful. Episodes like The King of Omashu, The Fortune Teller, and other parts of other episodes are quite funny, so it's good to see that the focus on comedy isn't wasted. And it's important to remember that it wasn't afraid to get more serious. I've seen in episodes like The Storm and the Blue Spirit, and pretty much all the episodes, it strikes a good balance between comedy and more serious aspects. Now, I've talked a lot about the good aspects of the season. Let's talk about the bad. There isn't a lot, but first let's talk about some of the weaker episodes. The two episodes that rated below a 7 were The Winter Solstice Part 1, which got a 6, and The Great Divide, which got a 5.5. Now, neither of these got a 5 or lower, which I explained earlier on my scale are not bad episodes. I was go as far to say that The Winter Solstice Part 1 is good, just weaker than the others, especially when you take into consideration what it sets up. Now, The Great Divide is interesting. It's the only episode in the season, and the entire show, that I think could be skipped without losing anything. I wouldn't skip it, I just wouldn't really skip any episode of any show, but there isn't really any setup for anything, and it's not super enjoyable on its own. However, even with its bad parts, it's always enjoyable seeing these characters as long as they're not out of character. So even with the worst episode of the show, it's really not that bad. And while I don't consider it good, it's closer to good than bad. Pretty much all the episodes above that are at least pretty good. Now, the main problem people have with this season is that it's more episodic. However, like previously stated, it also sets up a lot for later, and has some great foreshadowing. One of the best examples of this is in the Northern Air Temple. Members of the Fire Nation are standing around an air balloon, and one man says, "This defeat is the gateway to many victories." And in the Day of Black Sun, it partially is what wins them that huge battle. That's just one of many examples. That's about all I have for you today. I appreciate you guys watching to the end, and I'm very happy how this turned out. I'm planning on doing Book 2 and 3 really soon. I'm already in the process of the Book 2 review. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Bro Dude, out.